plays into the fact that up until recently, foreign policy was not a strategy in election manifestos as front and center. It was always, if you looked at the election manifestos, including that of the ANC, the front and center of the excuse me, of the election manifestos was domestic issues, things around national policy around the triple oppression that they called unemployment, poverty, and inequality. And the way in which opposition parties would respond to that is they would react to the fact that the ANC has not delivered on their promises. When it came to foreign policy, you found the election manifestos having small little sections that you never really saw to what extent they would actually envision a foreign policy based on what our national development priorities are. For the ANC, it was always linked in terms of our national development priorities is linked to our foreign engagements and foreign investment and bringing in, attracting trade and investment, and that's how they played that kind of interlocking role between the domestic and the foreign spaces. I've seen a fundamental shift in since the Ukraine war has started, and the fact that the South African government has not taken a position against Russia. So domestically, you've got elites in the foreign policy community, both within media, within official opposition parties, as well as in the broader foreign policy community of analysts and commentators, who have now taken South Africa, taken the government on and said, you have basically lost your moral compass. You haven't defended the Ukrainian people. What we also see in South Africa is a strong Ukrainian advocacy group, and they get a lot of media attention. So I think the way Russia is perceived in the global arena is finding its resonance in South Africa's domestic engagement and domestic environment. It does not mean, for me, I want to test the hypothesis to ask how many South Africans believe that South Africa's position towards Russia warrants us to be much more assertive against it, because that's what the elites in the foreign policy space are saying, those that are anti the South African stance. They are saying that we have betrayed the Mandela identity of foreign policy, that we have betrayed our moral compass in the international arena, that we have betrayed the human rights dynamic of our foreign policy, because Mandela wrote about it in the 1983 article. The problem with this debate is it's hinged on the fact that there are different perceptions of what we should be doing. I think after next year's election, my sense is two things. If the ANC wins by a very, very minimal margin, just around 48, 49, 50%, and if it has to go into a coalition, it won't need the big parties. Because some of the polls are suggesting that the ANC will need at least about 3 to 4% with the coalition structure to get over the 50%. That means the foreign policy will stay the same, but the challenge will be what actors like in the Western Cape will do, because they now think that they fall outside of the national strategy of foreign policy. If the ANC comes below 45%, if it has to come down to about 40%, if those predictions are right, then it will have to look to the bigger parties. Now, the three big parties in the country is the ANC, the Democratic Alliance, and the Economic Freedom Fighters. The DA gets around about, the last election, they got less than 22%, and they haven't moved the needle from in terms of increasing their support base. Assuming they get around about 24%, 25%, they will have to make a coalition. They will have to think about an engagement with the ANC, which is the next biggest party, if they get 40%, or with the EFF, which may get between 10 and 12%, or if a little bit higher. But even if they do go into a coalition with the third largest party in the country, they have had fights with that party. They have had tensions. So they will have to have a massive coalition. So this forecasting of South African foreign policy, I think, will remain much more contested in the domestic arena. But when it comes to what happens at the national level, I think it will continue to limp along until such time that we'll see what happens in 2029. In the interim between 2020, after next year's election, and 2029, when the next election happens, I think a lot of things can change. The big challenge would be what I would take as 3 or 4 key pivotal issues that South Africa will want to, the government will want to think about. How does it domesticate or revise the domestication of the Rome Statute? Revitalizing its strategy with the BRICS, if markets close off with AGOA. Thinking about revitalizing investment in South Africa, particularly in our very, very now weakened and deficit infrastructure around electricity, logistics, transport, railway, that whole kind of thing. And then, of course, in key infrastructure around water, sanitation, whatever. There is limited capacity within state-owned enterprises to do this. So we may see that the South African government, if the ANC remains, if they continue to remain, and we don't have any shocks in how they are moving forward, that we will see particular issues that will be given much more elevation in terms of reforming the way South Africa wants to do business in the international arena. But I think that with countries like the US and the EU, there's going to be a constant corridor of negotiations to appease these countries, that South Africa is not leaning only towards the BRICS countries or leaning only towards China, because that's another tension. So I think for now, we're going to see the status quo remain in terms of our foreign policy being caught in these vulnerabilities and contestations. I don't think the DA will have enough traction after next year's election to remove the South African government, remove us from certain things, because to do that, we'd have to change the way the state is defined as a unitary actor. And so it's not a federal system, and it has to go to the constitution. I think that there would be an uproar in terms of the fact that you also have to think about that there'll be challenges to certain questions around whether or not we should belong to the BRICS. And my hypothesis is, at a time when the world is in such an unpredictable such an unpredictable situation, giving up one in favor of the other is not in your strategic interest.
Probably
and
not.
So you've got to hedge all your bets. Africa is going to be pivotal in terms of how South Africa redefines its Africa strategy.